prime thing is you have to win.
Ill intent, violence, physicality, pain. Enough is enough.
Welcome back to the Just Win podcast. I'm Ted Wynn. That's Vic Tafer. That's Sean Reed. This is episode 4, and today we do not have a guest, but we have plenty to talk about with the Raiders scrimmaging each other at Allegiant. Also, I thought our intro was pretty cool, and special thanks to Aaron Bruno from OLine for putting that together and getting through Vic's edit notes.
I'm tough, man. Tough. It's got to be good. The bar is high.
Yeah, executive producer Vic Tafer on the beat, you know.
That's me.
Yeah, but it had me pumped when I listened to it. I think it's pretty good. So shout out to him. But let's get into it. So what were you guys' biggest takeaways from the Vikings game and the live practice?
Yeah, I think the Vikings game, that was the first time we've seen both quarterbacks look good on the same day, probably since they got here. I thought Aiden O'Connell, he only played one drive, but I thought it was a pretty methodical drive, worked him down the field. I know they ended up having to settle for a field goal, but I feel like that was more on the left tackle than it was on him on that final play. And then Gardner Minshew, he came in the second quarter. He wasn't as efficient. He kind of was a little bit more erratic, but he had more explosive plays, and the offense looked pretty good with him as well. And so I think, that was the biggest takeaway for me anyway from the Vikings game, was it kind of gave fans and the team a little bit of a reason to not be in as much of a panic mode about the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think this offense is showing signs of life, both in that game against the Vikings and also on Wednesday night at Allegiant. The fans get to see kind of what they're doing as far as the quick passing game, and I think both quarterbacks did a pretty good job of both those things, where they can hit the tight ends, you can hit Davante Adams is back now, Trey Tucker's doing well after kind of a rocky training camp. We had a lot of drops. I think DJ Turner is also
some time to settle in. That's all he needed.
Yeah, I guess
settled in, so he's good. I mean, that was a pretty incredible catch, the over-shoulder catch. That's a hard adjustment to make in the air.
Yeah, he's the guy that the coaching staff was raving about all offseason about the work he put in. So I think now we're seeing the benefits of that. And if he can be, a deep threat and a third weapon in terms of the receiving core, that's pretty good, because we also we talked about the tight ends being a big part of the offense. But that's 5 guys right there who can get open and get the ball from either of these 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, the Raiders need a guy like Trey Tucker, because they have Davante Adams, they have Myers. Those guys are great route runners. Davante obviously can win deep, but he's not a speed guy. And then you have the 2 tight ends. There's a lot of guys that work, underneath the intermediate. Having a deep threat that can help take the top off the offense is, you kind of need that. So having Trey Tucker be a little bit more consistent with his hands will be a big thing for this offense. And, I think we'll probably talk more about the quarterbacks as we get along, but I really liked how Luke Getsy used Bowers, just moving him all over the field. And me and Tashan wrote an article about 12 personnel this week. And this could be a team the rare team that actually majors in 12 personnel, even teams that use a lot of 12 personnel at the end of the year, 11 personnel, 3 receivers is going to be what they major in a little bit more than other personnel groupings. But this team might actually be a team that uses 12 personnel at, 49 to like 50, maybe over 50%, because Bowers isn't a traditional tight end. He's a guy that you can move around. He was at outside receiver. He was at slot. He was at tight end. They even moved him to fullback. So a lot of interesting usage for Bowers in this game. What do you guys think about Bowers and his first performance in this Vikings game?
Yeah, I mean, I thought we all knew they were going to live out of 12 this year. Especially ahead of the game. I mean, they released their depth chart in 12 personnel, which you don't really see in the modern day NFL anymore. But it makes sense. I mean, you don't spend, the 13th overall pick on a guy if you don't plan to start him. And they still, thought highly of Michael Mayer, who they drafted in the second round last year. And so, as expected, I mean, they came out, and I think that pretty much that whole first drive, they used 12 personnel with those 2 guys on the field. I thought, Bowers, he only had a couple catches, but he looked the part. You saw some of that explosiveness and the movement skills that he has. As you said, they're able to move him all across the field and take advantage of some matchups. And, they only ran the ball a few times when they were both out there. I think Zamir White got 3 carries, but they averaged around, 4.3 yards per carry. So it was a solid efficiency in the run game. And so that's a really small sample size, of course, but they showed what they could do from a blocking perspective. I think one of the plays that stood out, from the story that we did, Jacoby Myers, one of those big catches he had early, both of those guys were staying in to block, on that play and sort of still were able to act as decoys to free up other players. And so it's not just, obviously they want both, Bowers and Mayer to have big receiving seasons, but they could also create a lot of opportunities for other guys as well and make it more difficult to send, double teams and safety help towards Davante Adams every single play like we've seen really the last couple of years. And so I thought it was a nice, first impression for Bowers, but also just Getsy and seeing how he plans to use these two guys on offense.
Yeah, I think it's ironic how the Raiders dumped the Patriots way, and then they go with the two tight end system. That was so. But yeah, both guys were playing with a lot of confidence. Both
And he also
Bowers.
drafted Olave too.
Yeah, there you go. And there. So I give out my hot gambling tip on Twitter the other day about Brock Bowers, 50-1 to win Rookie of the Year. I think the only reason why I like it. I think it's good odds for guys to be a huge part of the offense. The only reason why I don't love it as much as I would like to is because I think Michael Mayer's going to have also some pretty big numbers also. So I think he'll take away from what Bowers can do. But again, he's a guy who I think would just scratch on the surface. You see it every day. He gets better and better. And again, the confidence is there. A guy knows he can make plays at this level coming into the league. So I think very exciting thing for Raider fans to kind of to watch this season.
So writing this article, we did a little bit of research. Only 4 tight end duos in the history of the NFL had both tight ends surpass 600 yards. And the first one ever was in 1979. It was actually the Raiders, David Casper, and was it Raymond Chester? I forget the second tight end's name.
Believe so. Yeah.
So does this become the 5th duo to have 600 yards each?
Yeah, maybe at some point they better be, for this to be worth it. This year we'll see. I mean, I could see, one of them maybe having like 500 or some type of
They
modest
also have
season.
17 games too.
Yeah, you have 17 games, but they have a lot of, like we talked about. I mean, you have, Davante Adams, you have Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, stepping up this year. And I just think, while they're going to live out of 12, I do think this will be a run first team. With Luke Getsy, that's kind of how he's always been as offensive coordinator. And with the quarterback situation that they have, I don't know if they're going to be throwing it 40 times a game. You know what I mean? So, you need a certain volume. Maybe every time they touch the ball, they just go for huge gains, and that's how they get to 600. But I think it'll be close this year. If they do end up becoming the next duo, I think it'll be, by the skin of their teeth a little bit.
Yeah, it's a big number. I think 600 each with Davante Adams on the field is, for me, a little hard to imagine, but it's possible. And again, maybe, we don't want to say if something happens with Davante in terms of in November, maybe there's more openings in the offense. But
Come on, man, you're starting off
no,
negative.
I say anything. No, I'm just saying.
Man.
I'm saying who knows. I don't know. But yeah, obviously the potential is there. Like Sean said, for the future and next year, I definitely they can get that. But this year, I think maybe it's more of a work in progress.
Yeah, and the big thing is they have to be able to run the ball, because if you don't run the ball and you don't have success rushing the ball, teams are just going to treat your 12 personnel like it's, Bowers is a big slot receiver, and they're going to go nickel, and you lose your advantage in a pass game that way. So the offensive line does come into play here. Can they run block? And if they are able to, you have so many advantages. I mean, those other tight end duos, they didn't have a receiver like Davante Adams outflanking them. And when, teams have to respect their 12 personnel, it makes the defensive looks a lot simpler. You're going to line up in a bunch of heavy fronts with base personnel, and then you take away a lot of the exotic coverages that teams have used against Davante Adams to try to take him out of the game. So if you're able to run the ball, have teams respect you, it just creates all sorts of advantages for the offense to take advantage of.
Yeah,
But any
I think
other
we saw
thoughts
that.
from the Vikings game?
I was gonna say on that note, I think we saw that you broke that play down, and later in that first drive against the Vikings, where he had Bowers line up as a fullback, and he was out in the flats. I think he was matched up with a defensive end, and
Yep.
there's not too many defensive ends that are going to stick with
Big
him in
defensive end
coverage.
too.
Yeah. So as much as they can take advantage of that kind of stuff and create advantages, helped the overall offense. But I guess on the downside from the Vikings game, something that was a little bit surprising, at least for me, was the defense did not look too good. I mean, even the starters, when they were in there, Sam Darnold, I mean, he worked them down the field pretty quickly on that first drive. They stalled out and they held up well in the goal line situation. But I thought the Vikings had a lot of success offensively. Even JJ McCarthy when he came in before he got hurt, he had a couple big plays and running the ball as well. I think that seemed to be what bugged Antonio Pierce the most coming out of the game was the run defense was not good at all. And as much as the defensive line last year, I think they surprised us with how productive they were from a pass rush perspective. Like they were just okay against the run. Like they were like around average, a little bit below average when it came to stopping the run. And so I think that's going to be a big deal this season, seeing if they can turn that around.
I was going to say, going back to what you said about the offensive line and the run game, and should we be more concerned about the offensive line at this point? It seems like we're kind of here we are. Colton Miller's not back yet. Powers Johnson came back last night, but he's wearing a red jersey, can't be touched. So appears they won't be starting the opener. Probably Cody Whitehair at the guard spot. Thayer Munford's got an injury again. The other hand is now hurt. DJ Glaze getting some more reps, but he's a rookie. So I'm kind of curious. Look, you're talking about the offense coming around and all the hopes for the 12 personnel and all, but the O-line, I think we may be sleeping on it being a bigger issue than it is.
Yeah, I mean, offensive line wasn't good last year. I thought we were, coming off of Josh Jacobs, winning the rushing title back in 2022. I thought we expected for the offensive line to at least be solid last year, but they really regressed. I mean, they couldn't run the ball for much of the season, and like their pass rush metrics were favorable, but I think a lot of that was just because they were throwing the ball so quickly. When they actually had to, block for a while and they were trying to throw the ball downfield, I think you saw things crumble pretty quickly there, and so. They made a lot of changes. Obviously, they have new offensive line coach in James Craig, new offensive coordinator in Luke Getsy, and they're switching to more of a zone-based blocking scheme. They were more of a gap-based team last year, so there's a lot of transition. And they did make some additions to the group. As you mentioned, Powers Johnson was the biggest one. The guard that they drafted in the second round, but he'd been out since OTAs due to a concussion that he suffered. It isn't exactly clear like when the concussion happened, but he had history of concussions in college, and so it seemed like they were pretty, careful with bringing him back. We saw him get back out there at practice yesterday, but like you said, AP doesn't think he's going to be ready to start week one. Obviously, it doesn't mean he's going to sit on the bench the entire season. Maybe halfway through the year, he ends up carving out a starting role. But there's a lot of things up in the air. Colton Miller coming back from offseason shoulder surgery. I think even when he was out there last season, I think it was a little bit below his standard. I would say. I don't think Colton Miller isn't like a top 5 left tackle or anything like that, but he's pretty good. And last year, I think, was a little bit of a bumpy year for him. They have Dylan Parham moving to right guard. Thayer Munford, we'll see if he can stay healthy or if he's ready to step in at right tackle. So I don't think you're overreacting too much to that being a question mark. We definitely have to see them go out and prove it. They're confident internally about that group, but clearly there's a lot of potential issues there.
Yeah, I think it's all going to center around the run game, and we didn't see much of the run game against the Vikings. They came out and were pretty pass happy. And I think JPJ is going to attribute to that run game whenever he does get into the starting lineup. There's question marks about Munford as a pass blocker, but I think he's a pretty good run blocker. So we'll really see how this offensive line gels together in a run game. When you move to the outside zone, it does take some time. There's a lot of communication involved. So we'll see how they're able to gel together early in the season. And when Craig was with the Niners, they're a team that just did not invest a lot in offensive line. I mean, they had Trent Williams and then just 4 other dudes they just kind of cobbled together. So we'll see if he can work some of that magic with the Raiders offensive line. But going back to the defense as well, I'm not as concerned about the starting defense. I think they were pretty vanilla. They just played like cover 2, and I think against the run, they're not going to be a very strong team. But when I talked to Patrick Graham, he talked about being very multiple up front and how that affects run offenses and their communication. And, they just weren't going to do that in a first preseason game. So I'm not as concerned. But I do think that there are some depth issues with this defense, especially up front. When you move into that second and third line, it does get pretty shaky.
There are a few plays where I saw Christian Wilkins, against the run, take on 2 guys, and Kuntz I thought did some well in some spots there. So I thought, despite the overall concern about the run game in that game and the getting off blocks. I thought the main guys definitely flashed what we can look for in the regular season. I think they're going to be fine against the run, and I think their D line is really good and it's pretty deep. I still don't know about Tyree Wilson, what his role is going to be, but at this point, doesn't matter too much.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about like the second half performance because at that point it's end of the roster guys, guys that probably aren't going to make the team, so I wouldn't react too much off of that. But even I do think there's a little bit more concern about like the run defense being where it needs to be, and then just the depth overall of the defense. But again, first game of the preseason, like Ted said, they're pretty vanilla. Usually defenses are more vanilla than offenses, so nothing worth overreacting to, I don't think.
I will say that
Yeah,
Byron Young, we talked. I talked him up, I think, at training camp. I don't think he played that well. I thought he kind of stepped back from training camp. I
no.
thought he was kind of looked like a guy who was like last year, kind of didn't really belong. So maybe hopefully that was just a glitch and he can bounce back this week. But he's worked hard this offseason. I don't think he has a lock on the spot by any means. So I think he has to show well on Saturday night and also next week.
So let's talk about Tyree Wilson because he's a guy that should theoretically take a step up and be a big part of his rotation. But when I see your guys' training camp updates, it just never seems like Tyree Wilson is a part of that. So it doesn't seem like he's making a lot of plays. And when I watched him, I think his get off and hand usage is a little bit more consistent from what I've seen. But really, all he has right now in his bag is a bull rush and a long arm, and blockers kind of know it, and they don't really. They just know how to anchor down. So he at least is better at the fundamental things, but he needs to add some counter moves to his repertoire. And I know he's worked with Max Crosby extensively, but is he just at a point where he's not confident enough to try new things just yet? He's just trying to get the basic things down and do them really well. I mean, he has a really strong bull rush. He was pushing guys back, but if that's all you're relying on, it takes too long to get to the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to psychoanalyze his confidence and things of that nature, get inside guys' heads,
Why
but
not? Why not? Come on, let's do it.
I mean, yeah, I don't fucking know. But Adam Butler, I mean, that was something that he was very outspoken. But when he talked to us in Costa Mesa, I think he mentioned that trying to get Tyree Wilson to be one of those guys to just focus on doing these few things well, and then you can expand beyond that, in due time. And so, I think maybe a little bit of trying to simplify things for him, and because he didn't really like, you know have much overall that went well for him last season, and so you got to start somewhere. I mean, he's not somebody that they're looking to be a starter this season, and so that alleviates a lot of the pressure. And it really just need him to be an effective rotational defensive lineman. The inside outside guy that can move around and hopefully make some flashes off the bench. But we haven't even seen that so far, to be honest. I mean, he's out there a good amount. He looks good physically and he's healthy, but he's just not making that many plays in the backfield. And again, he's a young guy. He's only his second year in the league, so you don't want to write him off for good forever. But I just don't see it right now in terms of him being a big contributor this year.
Not only that, but the Raiders would never say this, but I'm not sure he's the third defensive end. I think there's a decent chance that Janarius Robinson's ahead of him on the depth chart. I think you see from him some explosiveness at times. He's got a nice long body, and he can definitely he's definitely more explosive than Tyree is right now. And so I think he's definitely raw. Doesn't have the power, like you said, and maybe the college clips that Tyree does. But I think in terms of practice, I've noticed him maybe more often. I think the teammates definitely kind of think he's making strides. So it wouldn't shock me if Janarius is ahead of Tyree in terms of the defensive end depth chart come week one.
Speaking of Butler, he was pretty disappointing in his snaps against the Vikings too. Just couldn't get much of a rush going. Got pushed around a little bit. So hopefully that's just a preseason week one thing, and he's able to play better. And a guy that stood out to me was Jack Jones. I mean, I thought all day he had really tight coverage. We talked to Eric Allen about how he's taking a step up as far as being a student of the game. And I mean, I thought I had some questions about him just being a quarterback one as far as just consistency, but good start. At the in the first preseason game, I thought he locked up Jordan Addison, and that interception he got, it was a blitz, cover one blitz, so he had no help underneath. JJ McCarthy actually bought time on that play. And anytime you have a blitz and you're playing man and the quarterback buys time, that's a bad situation to be in. But he was able to undercut that crosser and get an interception. So, good sign for Jack Jones, and maybe those tons of interceptions he made in practice going to translate this year.
It's funny because I could give a shit about Madden ratings, but Jack Jones, I guess, is really upset about his 74 rating and mentions it every friggin' day. I think that's like driving him. I mean, beyond everything else, to have a great year. So it's kind of funny if Madden did the Raiders a favor. He
74?
clearly, yeah, 74. So he's really, I don't know what that means. I don't play Madden for years. So I guess it's not good for a guy who's, that athletic ability that he has. And I think he had a stat where I think he said he has 4 interceptions in 22 games. It's the fastest clip ever. So he's done his
What?
homework. That's what he said. I don't know if it's true or not, but
I don't think
uh,
that's
I,
true.
I like it. I mean, so yeah, I mean, he's definitely fired up, which is definitely he's a key. I guess before, I think he's the most important guy on this team as far as getting to where they want to go.
Yeah, I mean, if he has a couple more interceptions in the preseason, they got to bump him up to an 80 at least. I mean, 74 that's
They bump
trash.
guys. They bump guys during the year, or have they wait till next year? I don't know how that
Yeah,
works.
no, they bump guys. They have adjusters that actually come
Wow.
to every game, and then players either trash on them or try to kiss ass. But yeah, it's a big deal. It's a thing.
Hey man, I'm old. I don't know.
Let's say this guy here. But yeah, I guess we can move on to practice this week. I guess the biggest news was we mentioned it already. Powers Johnson coming back from injury. AP did say that he expects Miller to come back to practice next week after the Cowboys game, and so Munford did get banged up in practice earlier this week. We'll see if he's able to get back out there and continue to try to fend off DJ Glaze from competing at right tackle. But they're optimistic that the offensive line will be back to 100% next week. I guess that's the biggest news, just in terms of injuries and availability wise. I guess we have like a little bit of I don't really think it's that big of a deal, but Davante Adams earlier this week, he said that if it was up to him, he wouldn't play in the preseason. And AP was asked about it yesterday, and he said if you're healthy, you're going to play. And it was a broad statement. They've been playing their starters, so people are kind of Vic especially. This is
Yeah, man,
really
you gotta sell better than that, man.
uh,
This is high drama. This is what's gonna happen Saturday. I can't wait to see. Is he gonna play? I don't know. Is he
yeah.
gonna
I mean,
be?
they have no joint practices, so I think these preseason reps are kind of valuable for the starting offense. Maybe not Davante Adams, who
I must say it's
is a
Davante
seasoned
Adams. Like,
vet,
does
but
Davante Adams need to play in the preseason? Like, honestly, do we need to see Davante Adams show that he can play football?
I don't know. He might get a little a nick tonight, maybe a little tweak tonight at practice. Can't go Saturday. We'll see.
I mean, he's been
Uh,
out in training camp. He has a new son. You got to get him in football shape. So maybe this is just like get him in shape a little bit.
I think he's in good enough shape. I think he
yeah,
knows.
I
I
think
think
he's
he's
fine.
fine. I think he.
I mean, there's always the threat of a dad bod. The dad bod threat is coming.
Man.
I mean, he could use more reps with Gardner Minshew for sure. I think you can definitely see even last night in the practice where he definitely has much more confidence and he's more comfortable with Aiden than Gardner. That makes sense. They went through a lot last year, a lot of reps. So if that's the case, and I want him to get some familiarity with Gardner, then I'm all for it, and I think that makes sense. But otherwise, like you said, I mean, he's Davante Adams. I don't think he needs to play in the preseason. Some guys who are at the top of their game, you want to protect them from possible injury and not throw them in a game against a bunch of
Okay.
hoo-has.
So I guess if we were the committee to deciding whether Adams plays, I'm outvoted 2-1. He
Yeah,
doesn't play.
you lose.
Okay.
No.
So Cowboys game will determine to start at quarterback.
Woo!
Thoughts on that process and predictions for who wins the job?
Who's first?
You go. Yeah.
I believe, unless Gardner Minshew really balls out and has a big night and much better than Aiden, I think Aiden O'Connell will be the starting quarterback. I think they say it's been open competition, and Antonio's wants him to kind of step forward and be the guy. Really hasn't happened. I think they're kind of similar skill sets, similar ceilings for both of them. I think the reason why I think Aiden will be the guy is because He is a little better in terms of accuracy in the short passing game, which is important in this offense. I don't think Davante gets a vote, but Davante definitely is more comfortable with Aiden. So for those reasons, I think it'll be easier to go with him being the incumbent guy from last year and kind of trying to build off what he had last year. So I think Aiden will be the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of the process, I think two preseason games, in addition to all the practices they've had, should be enough to figure out which way you want to roll, and yeah, that gives you some time to give whoever the starter is, those starting reps leading up to the start of the season, and allowing them to get comfortable in offense and things of that nature. So I'm fine with them making a decision, I guess early, even though they have a third preseason game, they could theoretically wait until after that. But yeah, I think I'd agree with Vic. I think Aiden O'Connell's going to end up being the starter, barring a massive gap between the two against the Cowboys on Saturday. I mean, I think they've been about the same through training camp, not in a good way. Like they both just struggled a lot, and so I think if that's the case, rolling with the guy who was the incumbent starter, the younger guy who, I know he's going to be 26 this season, but theoretically he could still get better. I think that makes sense. And also, Gardner Minshew, he's a guy that he's never really gone into a season as the guy, but he's done a good job of, when called upon, coming off the bench and stepping in as a starter if need be. And so if O'Connell goes out there and starts and he just sucks the first half of the season and they have to yank him, I think Gardner Minshew has a better chance of coming off the bench and playing well than Aiden O'Connell would. And so I think if I had to make a decision right now, I think O'Connell starts week 1, but there's no guarantee he ends week 18 still having that job.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think if you are really using this game too to really swing who you want to start, that could be a dangerous thing to do. Just because Gardner Minshew is kind of like a high highs type of guy and low valleys type of guy. I mean, we saw some of that high end play against the Vikings, throwing off his back foot and that kind of stuff. But that kind of stuff can get you in trouble as well. But if he is, kind of in his zone and balling out in that week 2, and if that affects your decision too much, um, I don't like that process. But I think you have to kind of consider who he's been his entire career. You have a much better idea of who Gardner Minshew is, and it's just not a very high ceiling quarterback. And if it's close, I think you have to go with O'Connell, especially since I think O'Connell probably can take care of the ball a little bit better, and this is going to be a defensive team who will not be too happy with a quarterback turning the ball over too much. So yeah, I would go O'Connell. But
I,
The thing on turnover part, like O'Connell doesn't really protect the ball that well. I think we give him a lot of credit for that because he's like a traditional drop back passer. But like last season, I mean, he had a good amount of interceptions and fumbles, and in training camp, he's turned it all over just as much as Minshew has, I think. And so he does need to clean things up in that area. I don't think he's like a guy that's just protecting the football super well so far.
Yeah, I think I mentioned before. I also am concerned he has his hitch. I think this year, which I didn't see last year, and I do think if you are, this is open competition. I do think Gardner's been better. I think it's been close, but I think Gardner is better in the live scrimmage at Costa Mesa. I think he had better results in the Vikings game. So I know you don't want to base it on week 2 in the preseason, but if he has better results on Saturday night, he has to be the guy because that's what Antonio said. It's open competition. Players in the locker room are feeding off that. And so if they think that Gardner Minshew had a better camp, a better preseason than Aiden did, but Aiden's a starter, then you really start to kind of like, there's question marks and things are like, what are we doing here? So I think you're right. Theoretically, you don't want preseason to determine a game, against the Cowboys to determine who the starter is. But in this case, they kind of put themselves in this corner where if Gardner Minshew plays better than Aiden O'Connell does Saturday, I think he has to be the starter.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's like if AOC goes out there and throws 2 picks and looks bad and Minshew sets it on fire, I think if there's like a massive gap in that way for sure. But if, I thought they were like relatively even the
Yeah.
first preseason game. Like Minshew played more, but I don't think I don't think either one of them was decidedly better than the other, honestly. But yeah, if there's a huge gap, I do think that'll influence their decision for sure.
The other question is like, they're going to announce this on Sunday, I guess. Antonio wants to do that. But we mentioned the offensive line question marks. And now, if you have an offensive line that's banged up, and we don't know about Colton going forward, but wouldn't that favor Gardner Minshew being your guy because he can scramble, can get out of trouble more ably than Aiden can?
Well, I mean, if they think they're all going to be healthy by next week, which is what AP's saying, like maybe they don't think the offensive line's an issue, but um, I guess it's kind of hard to say until
Right.
we see that.
Well, it's also kind of a double-edged sword because he's also a guy that will hold on to the ball a little longer and try to extend, but at the same time, he's not like a superior athlete. I mean, he's more athletic than Aiden O'Connell, but like he's not a guy that's going to be breaking tackles and getting outside the pocket super often, even if he wants to hold on to the ball to make plays. So that it's not just the interceptions or fumbles; it's also the negative plays. You want to avoid the negative plays, and O'Connell doesn't really do that because he can't. But maybe that's a good thing in this for this team.
I will add that I've done a story on Minshew. He runs tomorrow, but he did work in the offseason on his ball security and with a lot of drills with one John Gruden, his annual trip to Florida to work with the quarterback at the quarterback camp. So he thinks he's definitely has gotten better this offseason in that department.
Yeah. So quarterback's one position, and let's talk about the 53-man roster. Do we have projection ideas?
I mean, we don't have to go through the whole roster, but I think there's a few like position groups that stand out where I think most of this team, honestly, like whether they're starters or even backups, like we know what most of this roster is going to look like. Like there's not too many spots that are up for grabs. But the one on offense that stands out, and Vic, has talked about this and written about this, is the receiver position. For one, seeing how many receivers they keep. Do they keep five? Do they keep six? How they plan to use the tight ends factor into that? I think when it comes to the backup guys, DJ Turner is a guy that is pretty close to. I would consider him very likely to make it because of his special teams contributions. Like he's a pretty core player as a gunner, and even getting more involved in offense. I think the entry comes down to Jalen Guyton, and then Christian Wilkerson. Both of those guys are kind of backup outside receivers. They have different play styles. Guyton more of a speed guy. Wilkerson's more of a possession guy. Do they feel like they need to keep both of those guys? Is it only one of those guys? And if it is just one, which one would they lean towards? Obviously, Guyton played for the Chargers, and so he's more familiar with Tom Telesco, and so maybe he would have more favor in that area. But he's been hurt most of the year. I mean, he missed most OTAs and training camp. He's just kind of worked his way back into things the last couple of weeks, so he's playing catch up a little bit compared to Wilkerson. So I think offensively, that's probably the only position that really stands out.
Yeah, I agree. I think Guyton have as a step up on Wilkerson because Wilkerson's a guy you can probably put in practice squad like you have in the past. I'm not sure he was a guy you cut, you'll lose him. And I also think there's a chance to bring somebody in off waivers once the cuts are made. So I think 5 or 6 is a good question, and I guess in turn, do you keep 3 tight ends or 4 tight ends? I mean, I would think 4 because you have so much 12 personnel and maybe you need more depth. But if the first 2 guys are that good, and Harrison Bryant's pretty solid as your number 3 guy, maybe 3's enough. So those are definitely, I think, an offense the big question marks.
Yeah, I thought about tight end, but there's not really a fourth guy that I feel great about.
What Ted's guy?
Ted has
Fatherham?
different guy.
Fotheringham. That's well, yeah,
Uh,
that's up there in
uh,
his list of guys though. He loves
uh,
that guy.
yeah. So I mean, I guess maybe, but I think they need some depth at some other positions on the roster a little bit more than tight end. So that would be a little bit of a
Yeah,
surprising one to me. But yeah, I mean, switching over to the defensive side of the ball, I think while I feel better about the defense overall, I think there's some more questions about the depth, like we talked about earlier. In terms of roster spots, while I think the depth at defensive end is questionable, I think it's pretty clear like who's going to make the team there. I think obviously Tyree Wilson and then Janarius Robinson as backups probably make the most sense as the 2 guys there. But I think defensive tackle, linebacker, cornerback, safety, they're pretty much the rest of the defense. I think there's some questions about which guy's going to make the rosters as those backup spots. I guess was there anybody, some of those depth guys that stood out from the preseason or just from training camp overall that you guys think might be pushing for roster spots?
I thought the 2 Amaris looked good last week. Bernie and Mari Gaynor. I think Gaynor I thought had this the edge on Bernie. And I probably still think he does. I think he's a guy who had a nice player. He roamed far back and broke a play up. I think he's got some athleticism. I think he Didn't have a great college career. I think he was kind of used different places, but I think if he focuses on being a pass coverage linebacker, I think he has a nice future as a guy who can make a roster, and this one especially.
Ironically, I covered him. I used to cover
You
Florida
did?
State. Yeah,
Oh
I used to
shit.
cover Florida State. Man, he was there my first year there. He was a freshman, kind of tweener type, like you said. I mean, he was an outside linebacker, but he was also a pass rusher. But and he kind of ended up moving around throughout his college career. He actually transferred from Florida State to North Carolina. So always been a really athletic guy. Has a lot of burst and speed, and it's kind of similar to some of the guys they have in the linebacker room. Devon Diablo, of course, and Amari Burney and Amari Gaynor. So it's how many of those types do you need? And so I think that could end up being a question mark of with that fifth linebacker spot if they do keep five, which I think they probably would with how important kickoffs are now. You need more of those body types than maybe you did
Yeah.
previously. So even though they're a nickel team, I think you could justify having more linebackers around. So it could end up being a competition between the two Amaris to see who makes the roster.
Yeah, Pierce loves Eichenberg. He said that several times. I think he's a lock. And then Luke Masterson, I think he's a solid guy, and he's a team's guy. And also, he could be the kickoff guy. He could be doing the kickoffs this year with the new rules. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's gonna, I mean, we kind of speak about it jokingly sometimes, but I think that kickoff rule is really gonna play a factor in like who makes the roster.
Yeah.
Special teams, they always talk about how important they are, but I think this year they really go up a lot. And so that's when you look at even back on offense at the receiver spot, like DJ Turner, Christian Wilkerson, those guys have played a lot on special teams that could help their chances of making the team. But looking at the rest of the defense, I think cornerback is another position where we know who the starters are. At least I feel like Jack Jones, Jacorian Bennett, Nate Hobbs seem like the top three guys. Brandon Faison's a solid backup corner. DeCameron Richardson, he's had a good camp. Young guy they feel good about. But do they keep six corners, or do they have six corners that are worth keeping, or do they need to go out and sign somebody in free agency to add some more proven depth back there? Because Faison, I mean, he's been injured. He's injured right now. He missed most of last year due to injury. DeCameron, while he's looked good, he's a rookie. He's pretty raw. Can you depend on him if he has to step in? And I mean, they're starting cornerbacks. They have some guys. Really, all three of those guys have injury concerns. I mean, Jack Jones, he's had injuries throughout his career. Nate Hobbs the same. Jacorian Bennett last year. Part of the reason why he lost his job was he got hurt. And so, you have a lot of guys there. You have some talent there in the cornerback room, but you have a lot of guys who haven't been able to stay on the field. And so, I think that stands out as a position where maybe they end up needing to add a guy, like you said, after cuts and see if there's somebody on the waiver wire.
Yeah, I like they do. I think they, like you mentioned, DeCamerion is a nice prospect, but I wouldn't trust him at this point to kind of play any meaningful snaps. And the Devonshire didn't play well on Saturday, and I think he's more of a project type. So I definitely feel there's a need for a veteran guy to come in and kind of shore up that depth chart and get you some more reliable options as far as when you get to go nickel and some exotic coverages.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
there's some
think
good vet corners on the market still. So there's some options out there, and we'll see what happens on cut day if there's some more options out there. But cornerback depth is an issue throughout the league too. So I'm actually surprised that a lot of these vet guys haven't been signed.
I think part of it, like you look at like a Stephon Gilmore, like is he going to sign and not know that he's going to be a starter? Like he's going to tell Stephon Gilmore, yeah, you'll come in and be our number 4 cornerback. Like, he's made a lot of money in his career. He's an older guy. He's probably cool just chilling on the couch if that's going to be the case. You know what I mean? So I think we have to consider like these players, do they want that type of role or not? And so, we'll see. We'll see after roster cuts how things settle down. But I think safety is another position that stands out a little bit. We know that Trayvon Merrick and Marcus Epps are going to be the starters, and I think Isaiah Polamalu, he's a guy that's had a really strong training camp and has earned that third safety role, which they use pretty often. Patrick Graham has those 3 safety looks, but beyond that, I think it's a fair question of like who else is in that room. I don't think any of those guys have really flashed so far throughout training camp, but I think you got to keep at least 4 or 5 safeties, both for depth purposes, but also for special teams. But I don't think any of those guys have really separated themselves so far.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like Polamalu a lot. I think he's definitely a guy who's gotten better every time, every year. And I think he's definitely a nice third piece behind the first 2 guys. Again, you probably need a veteran guy. I don't really trust any of the guys I saw on the field Saturday. I think you mentioned like the quarterback still in the market. I think one of the reasons why they haven't signed is because if you waited this long, why not wait longer in case an injury comes up and there's a need and your leverage goes up? So there's no reason to take anything less than what he wanted at some point, and you can always sign a couple of weeks and maybe get more money. So there's no reason to sign at this point in August unless there's really a team that really wants you and needs you and wants to pay for you.
And that transitions into our first fan question. So remember, if you do want to ask a question, make sure you leave a comment on our latest YouTube video or on Apple. Give us a good rating and leave a comment there. But Box Score Boy asks, "Are we going to spend any of this cap money on free agents, or will it be used for extensions?"
Yeah, I mean they have a lot of cap space right now. According to Over the Cap, they have almost $35 million in cap space, but they don't seem to be urgent to use it, from what we've gathered. Whether that's on free agents or extensions, like I think they want to wait and see on some of the guys on the roster. They have a ton of guys that are up for contracts on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, Spillane, Diablo, Hobbs, Merrick, Epps, Kuntz. Like they have a lot of guys that are extension eligible that they could use that on. But I don't think that we'll see. I'll be a little bit surprised if we saw extensions before the season starts. We'll see what happens as it goes on and in the off season. But it seems like they're earmarking a good amount of that money for 2025.
I agree. I think those guys who deserve or warrant extensions, I would think Malcolm Kuntz is a guy that obviously everyone talks about. But if you're Malcolm Kuntz, again, why not wait? Why not? Because you're a pass rusher. I mean, those are really highly coveted around the league. You might as well try and get closer to being a free agency, what your market is. So I don't know if he's in a rush to sign anything long term. I know he likes it here. I know he's happy, but again, it's all about timing and leverage. And if you're him, why not wait and see what the demand for pass rushers is next offseason?
Yeah, got to save some space for Dak Prescott. But moving on to the next question. Mark Bewley 411 asks, "How worried should we be about the offensive line, defensive tackle, and cornerback depth?"
We kind of covered those already. I think the offensive line to me is a question mark. I mean, everyone's assuming Colton Miller will be back and fine in a week or so, and if that's true, then it definitely solves a lot of problems. I think Cody Whitehair is fine. I mean, I think he can definitely hold the fort down until Powers Johnson's back. Thayer Munford, I mean, I don't know how bad his hands are, but he hasn't been great this camp. I think last year they kind of wanted him to assert himself, but he really didn't do it. Again, this year, kind of the same deal. So I know he's, to me, he's still a question mark. DJ Glaze, I think, has been fine, but again, he's a rookie. A rookie right tackle, to me, is pretty dicey. So I definitely could see the need for another guy on the offensive line if one becomes available.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way to put it, they have bodies at all three of those spots, but how good they are, we'll see. But again, like your roster week one rarely is at your roster at the end of the season, so they can always make moves if need be at a later point.
And you guys seem pretty fine with the defensive tackle depth. Which young guy do you think will be, the guy who kind of steps up and be a good rotation piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think Byron Young, he had the best training camp amongst that group. I mean, he didn't really stand out against the Vikings, but again, like I don't put too much into preseason games, honestly. But I mean, like he seems like the guy that has the best chance, and then they plan on using Tyree Wilson on the interior a little bit more this year as well. So between the two of them, they would hope that they, I mean, the fourth defensive tackle spot, like how many snaps is that really? Like I don't think it's a ton. That top three of obviously Christian Wilkins, John Jenkins, and then Adam Butler. I think they're going to eat up most of those snaps at defensive tackle. So I don't think they need a ton of extra snaps. You know what I mean? But I think they feel like between Byron Young and Tyree Wilson, there should be a spot that they can fill in.
Yeah, I think they're fine. I think like Butler to me is a key guy. He definitely seems motivated and played pretty well last year. And he's a guy who can definitely take on a step up. And like you said, rotation of the first three guys is probably enough. You don't need a lot from Byron Young or from Tyree.
Raiders Classics asks, who's on the verge of being cut that nobody expected?
These questions I always hate because who might have ruined someone's dream or get them thinking
like as if they're making a cut based on what you say.
Yeah, whatever I say, it's going to happen. So a surprising cut.
Brandon Faison, maybe.
I mean, I
Is it
think he would be.
surprising?
It'd be surprising for sure. I think he's probably more if if he really is hurt badly in that IR, but they kind of need him. I mean, I don't know whether they can really unless they bring somebody else in, a veteran guy. I think you kind of need him at this point. So what else we got? Who would surprise me?
Running backs. I feel like all the
Eh,
running backs kind of flashed a little
yeah.
bit.
I think the only other position maybe Jalen Guyton potentially. Like if they only keep 5 receivers and somebody's going to get cut, I think just on face value, like most people probably would be a little bit surprised if they keep DJ Turner and Christian Wilkerson over Guyton, given he's a Telesco guy and has played more offensively in his career to this point. So those are really the only ones, but they don't have a ton of spots like on their roster where I think something could really shock me realistically.
Yeah, like we said, this roster is kind of set. I mean, it's not a lot of spots that are open, so there won't be a lot of surprises. I don't think.
All right. And Led Tier asks, who are the top 5 bubble players we should be watching Saturday? Kind of a similar question.
Yeah, bubble players, I'd probably say Turner, Wilkerson, Bernie, Gainer, and MJ Devonshire. That would be my 4.
All right,
Or 5, I guess.
I'll throw in Byron Young. I think he needs to show well. I think, yeah, that's a good list. I think. Don't forget Nathan Peterman. Whoo, the new face, the new quarterback, baby. He's back, so he has a chance to beat out Anthony Brown for the 3rd job. Which those guys will get a lot of reps.
So bad last week. It might not be that.
People are excited about him. People are fired up.
Yeah, man, he was out there with the 5th stringers, guys. Cut him some slack, man. Yeah. Like shit. Who else was on the field?
See, when I watched him play, I didn't get the impression he was being hurt by the guys around him. But maybe I was watching the wrong way. But yeah, so competition, man. Now he's got competition. He's got Nathan Peterman to beat out for the 3rd spot. So we'll get a lot of snaps next 2 weeks. So we'll have a long chance to really evaluate those 2 guys and see who's best.
All right. So Armando asks, how conductive is the head coach seat with AP? If the Raiders are unwatchable, will they run it back next year with Vegas being a winning sports city?
Conductive. Could have just said warm bum, man.
Hot seat, yeah, warm bum. Could
have just said how
return. Warm bum.
Could have just asked us how warm is his bum. But anyway, yeah, I don't think this. I think something they would just have to be like the Panthers last year or something for something to happen on that front. I think so. I think he's fine.
Yeah, I think Antonio said several times he's got 2 years to kind of to do it his way, and I don't think he's going to have anything less than that. So I think he's got this year. Then even if things go south this year, I think he'll be back next year. So I think he's like he says, the culture's been put in. Now it's a matter of these players kind of coming through for him and taking another step up. So yeah, there's no warm bum, no hot seat, no nothing.
Oh, so on the warm bum scale, just 0.
Yeah.
In terms of being fired this year, yeah, I would say 0.
Okay. All right. Well, any other thoughts, or we're gonna wrap this up?
No, man. Cowboys, 7 p.m. Pacific time this Saturday, the preseason home opener. The deciding game to see who the quarterback's going to be, man. It's a huge matchup.
There's a lot on the line. A lot on the
prime
line.
time.
Well, it's huge, man. Got the receivers fighting for a spot.
Yeah, Davante Adams gate. You got quarterbacks. Hey, man.
It's good stuff, man. It's good stuff.
All right.
The season start? It's like we got 3 weeks till the season starts. Is that right? That's a long way, but we'll get there.
Yeah. 2 weeks and a bye week before the season starts. So yeah, 3 weeks. Right?
That's rough.
Too long. But we'll get there.
It's time for a Cody Whitehair feature or something. It's gonna fill the void.
Don't speak that into. Yeah, put that on. Cut that out.
Man, he's a good dude.
Our editors getting the ideas, man.
He's a good dude, man. Smart, knows the Getsy offense. Pick his brain a little bit. Be a hot story.
hot.
All right, I'm gonna let Tashan the editor know that, and yeah. All right. On that note, we will end this podcast. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Join us next week.
All right. See you guys.
Hasta la vista.